You are listening to Rabbi Aryeh Wolbe of Torch in Houston, Texas. This is the Living Jewishly podcast.
Welcome back to Living Jewishly, soon to be Simple Halacha. This week's halacha is the laws of Tzitzis. Now, because there are many, many laws regarding the mitzvah of Tzitzis, we're going to explain what that mitzvah is. We divide it into two parts. Hopefully we'll do the second part next week. But the Torah commands us to wear tzitzis, or fringes, on all four-cornered garments. All four-cornered garments. As it says, make for yourself bound tassels on the four corners of your garment. We understand from this, four corners. Another part of this mitzvah is uri'item oso. You should see the tzitzis, which teaches us, our sages learn from this, that when do you see things? By day. At night, we don't see because it's dark. Therefore, it's a mitzvah only by day. And because it is a time-bound mitzvah, women are not obligated in this mitzvah. It's a time-bound. It's triggered by time because it's only during daylight that this mitzvah is applicable. It is proper for every male to wear a special talit katan all day. A special talit katan. Talit katan is tzitzis, all right, which is a smaller garment that has four corners and have the strings on them, and to wear that all day. The mitzvah of tzitzis is a very special mitzvah, and all the mitzvahs of the Torah, our sages tell us, are equal to the mitzvah of tzitzis. That's how powerful the mitzvah of tzitzis is. It says, and you will look upon it, and you will remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. The numerical value for the word tzitzis is 600. It's 13 short of the 613 commandments. But if you take the 8 fringes and the 5 knots, it makes a total of 613. This is the number of the commandments contained in the Torah. Every Jew should endeavor to have a tallis cotton that is usually worn under the shirt or under a jacket and worn the entire day. The garment should ideally be made of white sheep's wool. The size of the garment should be a minimum of 24 inches length by 12 inches width. That's generally for children. You want to get something which fits comfortably. That's going to be very small. The sides of the tzitzis should be open so that if it's closed, it's not considered a four-cornered garment. Now, it's very interesting how this works. Like if you look at some rabbis have these long coats, these long frocks, and they have four corners. So if you look carefully, you'll see that one of the corners is actually rounded. It's not a four-corner garment. One of the corners is rounded. And that way, it's not a four-cornered garment. They're not obligated to tzitzis on that. Every Jew should endeavor to have a large tallis stringed with tzitzis to wear during morning prayers. Some begin to don a tallis gadol only after one is married. A tallis gadol is the big tallis. Others from bar mitzvah, and some even earlier. Some, like the German Jews, would start their children with a tallis at the young age of 5. They would come to shul, and the little children would be wearing a tallis at that age already. One should endeavor to have a beautiful garment. Similarly, all mitzvahs, like we mentioned previously, have a special mitzvah that it be performed with much splendor. Why? Because it says, Zeh Eli va'anveyu. This is my God, and I shall glorify him. We all know that we don't just buy flowers for the person we love. We don't just buy a gift to the people we love. We buy the nicest. When we're performing a mitzvah, what we're doing is, this is an expression of love. We don't just say, oh, well, as long as I'm done. Like, give me the cheapest mezuzah. No, I want the nicest mezuzah. Because this is an expression of my love for the Almighty. The entire process of making tzitzis should be done specifically for the purpose of tzitzis. There's a commandment to make tzitzis and to wear tzitzis, and therefore it must be verbally enunciated l'shem mitzvahs tzitzis, for the purpose of the mitzvah of tzitzis, which is called lishma, meaning for its sake. We're doing this not as a hobby. We're not just stringing these tzitzis for fun. We're doing this because this is a commandment that the Almighty required us to put tzitzis, fringes on all four-cornered garments. And therefore, I'm doing this mitzvah. When I was in Israel just recently, I went to a Tallis store and I bought a Tallis for my son, who's going to be bar mitzvah next year, Be'ezus Hashem, with Hashem's help. And I asked him to string it, and he strung the tzitzis I took a video of the entire thing from beginning to end in less than 6 minutes. And you see him repeating L'shem mitzvah tzitzis, L'shem mitzvah, for the sake of the mitzvah of tzitzis, for the sake of mitzvah tzitzis. And while he's stringing it, to not lose focus that he's doing a mitzvah here, a biblical commandment that Hashem asks in His Torah as a sign of love and dedication that all four-cornered garments have this string on it, these strings. The tzitzis strings should be adequately long enough to triple the length of the knotted area. So you have the knotted area, and then the strings that come from the knotted area should be able to go once and twice. That's how long they should be to triple the length of the knotted area. It is problematic if one can only secure a linen garment for tzitzis, since the wool strings would render the garment shatnez. Is anyone familiar with the mitzvah of shatnez? Shatnez, the Torah prohibits us from wearing wool and linen together in one garment. So if you have the wool strings and you have the linen cloth, you're going to have shatnez. So in such a case, there are differing opinions as to what should be done in such a situation. Ask your local bona fide rabbi what to do in such a case. Now, is very, very important. The Torah tells us, Petilim ta'aseh lecha. You should make fringes on your garment. What does it mean to make? That means that you should make it, not that it should be made. What does that mean? The tzitzis must be made on the garment of four corners and not vice versa. That means you don't make a garment for the strings. You make the strings for the garment. Meaning, when you're making the garment, don't pre-hang the tzitzis there. I'll give you another example. What's if you take one long string, very long string, and you put it into the garment, and now you wrap it up, and then after it's all done, you just cut the bottoms, and now you have it all. You're not allowed to do that. Why? Because you need to be making the tzitzis. They need to be active tzitzis when you're making them. We'll see in a minute how you do that. Al arba kanfos, it says on the four corners. The mitzvah is to attach the tzitzis at the corners. So what is the corner of the tzitzis? So you can't take a garment and say, I'm going to go a foot in on each side and that's going to be the corner. No, there has to be what defines a corner. So the halacha tells us no more than 3 thumbs breadths from the end and not less than the distance between the thumb's middle knuckle and the end of the nail from the edge of the garment. Because then it would be like too close to the corner. It's not going to be considered. And if you look at a pair of tzitzis, if the hole got torn slightly, so you have this little hole that the strings are hanging on from that hole, right? And now it gets torn slightly because, again, tzitzis are worn all day, especially my children. My children wreck their tzitzis, okay, because they play sports in them. They ride their bikes with them. They play football with them, right? So someone's tackling them, they can end up with 3 of their tzitzis strings in their hand. It takes a lot of abuse. So my children were constantly buying them. We buy them in a dozen, okay? So we buy them by the dozen. So what happens if it gets pulled from the corner and it gets torn a little bit? So if it's just slightly or even before it totally disconnects, you can restitch it and it would still be that it was tzitzis. But if it totally gets torn off, you have to start over again because, again, like we said, you have to make it and not from the made. Okay? Not from what is already made. If it got torn completely, the tzitzis must be restrung after repairing the garment. Okay, so what's the process of the knotting of the tzitzis? They're as follows, while keeping in mind the 4 strings should be put through each corner to make them 8, right? Because you take a string and now it goes through the corner, so now you have 8 strings. The strings are knotted twice. So you have 4 on each side. You knot them twice. The lead string, which is called the shamash, like we have for the menorah, which is the lead, which is longer, should circle the other string 7 times, then knot it twice, 8 times, then knot it twice, 11 times, then knot it twice, and then 13 times and knot it twice. So you have a total 5 sets of knots and 8 strings that come from it. It is best to keep the 4 strings from each side throughout the knotting process so that you don't mix and have 3 from this side and 1 from that, and then vice versa, and they all get mixed up. So you have 4 that constantly are consistent throughout the entire stringing process, that the 4 on the right side and the 4 on the left side stay in their sides. You make the knots, and then make the knots, and the 4 remain on their sides. The distance between the knots should ideally be equal to one another so that it looks beautiful. When they're synchronized, when they're equal, it'll look beautiful. If you have one which is a smaller, because some of them you're tying 7 circles around, 8 circles, 11, and then 13, so they're not going to be equal distance. So make them at an equal distance so that it looks beautiful. Before one dons a tallis, they should check to ensure that the strings are intact and kosher. So before you recite the blessing on the tallis, look at the strings, make sure that they are actually intact. Also, one should untangle the strings before wearing them. Doing this should not cause one delay. So it says the word of tzitzis, tzadik, yud, tzadik, taf, is tzadik yafrid tzitziyosav tamid. A righteous will separate the tzitzis and untangle them constantly. Before you do the mitzvah, make sure that the strings are not intertangled. Make sure that they're straight and that they're beautiful when performing the mitzvah. Now, what does it mean that you should not cause delay? What's if by untangling them, I'm going to be late to davening? Don't be late to davening to untangle. The tallis that will be used on Shabbos should preferably be checked on Friday. Why should it be checked on Friday? Because untangling a knot is a prohibition on Shabbos. So if you're going to wear this tallis on Shabbos, check it before Shabbos so that you don't come to untangling a knot on Shabbos. The bracha for the tallis should be recited prior to the performance of donning the tallis. Like all mitzvahs, we recite the blessing before performing the mitzvah. What's the exception to that? Lighting the Shabbat candles. Once you recite the blessing, it's Shabbat. So what you do is you light the candles, then you recite the blessing, and that way you didn't light the candles on Shabbos. The process of wearing a tallis. You hold the tallis with both hands and think consciously of the mitzvah to enwrap ourselves with tzitzis. While standing, recite the bracha lihisatev b'tzitzis, which we see below, and pronouncing it bat tzitzis and not bit tzitzis. It's a grammatical focus that should be made. Immediately after reciting the blessing, you cover the head with a tallis to extend till at least the mouth area, bringing the corners together and up to the neck. You wrap it in the manner that the Arabs wrap their scarves around their face. So you have the tallis over your head, you grab the 4 corners together over your shoulders, and then wrap him over your left shoulder. Remain standing like that for a few seconds and recite the verses of Mayakar. Then remove the tallis from your head. It is most proper to pray with the tallis worn over our head, and obviously customs vary for which parts of davening it's covered, if it's covered at all, and do people who are not married, do they cover their head? These are all various customs, and follow your family's custom or your synagogue's custom. And then care should be taken that the tzitzis not drag on the floor, because that would be disrespectful to the mitzvah. So as you see here on the bottom, blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, and has commanded us to enwrap ourselves with tzitzis. And then we have Mayakar, which is these beautiful verses from Psalms, and then we conclude the mitzvah of tzitzis. Now, tzitzis is a constant mitzvah. Our sages tell us that this is, like the Arizal says, that it's body armor. It's body armor to protect us from sin. It's body armor to protect us from any type of evil eye. And it's a body armor to maintain our Jewish identity. It's body armor for us to be proud, not to hide our tzitzis. The halacha says as well, in the Shulchan Aruch, that we should wear them out, as I do. I can't show them on the video here, or if you see them, but I have my tzitzis out on four corners, so that it's a constant reminder. Every time you see the tzitzis, it's supposed to remind you of the water, which reminds you of the heavens, and which reminds you of God's holy throne. And like this, you're constantly brought to a realization of consciousness that we're standing in front of the Almighty. Hashem should bless us all, that we should be able to fulfill this mitzvah beautifully and with love, and always feel that connection with Hashem.